Hello, everybody, and you are very welcome to Successful Perspectives. Successful Perspectives, of course, is when we deep dive into the topic of leadership with one of our members from our very selective network, Boardroom by EMIR. On this occasion, I am delighted to be joined by my friend and member, Chris Seymour. And Chris is the Head of Strategy and Investment for International Development for South Asia, Middle East, and Africa at Mott McDonald. Chris, it is wonderful to have you on Successful Perspectives, and thank you for joining us.
Very pleased to be here, Trevor, very pleased.
Now, I am going to have the great pleasure of picking your brains for a few minutes here. I've had, again, the pleasure of getting to know you over the years. And you strike me as somebody that is a mixture between driven and humble. That's my take on you from afar. And I'm always curious for all the different leaders in our network, what has kind of shaped them in that sense to make them that kind of a leader. So maybe we could start there. Maybe we could take a step into a time machine and go back a little bit in time and try and figure out, were there events or issues that took place over the course of your early stages of your career, now that you've the benefit of looking back a little bit, and they have had a significant impact in your leadership style or your leadership philosophy?
That's a great question. I suppose I start with, I've always been, throughout my career, I've been quite lucky to have very varied opportunities that have been presented to me. So I've been able to move around quite a bit, not just geographically, but really across those disciplines as well. But I suppose one of the key experiences for me was when I first started work. It must have been first or second job, I guess, and I was asked in to meet the board director, and of course I automatically thought I'd done something wrong, probably. But I went into his room, and I was struck by two things. First of all, he had a completely clear desk. And I thought to myself, now that's the sort of job I want, because definitely at the time my desk was not clear. All he had on it was a screen and a phone. The other thing that struck me was he even wanted to talk to me, and I clearly thought I had done something wrong. When I asked him, so what is it that you want me to talk about? He said, well, actually, I've made this deal with myself that I will speak to every single new person that comes into this organization. And you are that person. And I think for me, that's something I've always taken with me. So for me, I was being presented with somebody who was clearly pretty successful. If you managed to have a clear desk, that was successful. But also he had made it part of his work to connect with every single member of staff. And so I've carried that with me as well, going through my career. And I think that was a great start and a great experience.
And think about how poignant, how important that is. It's a very simple, elegant example, but think about that, right? Without aging either of us here, Chris, but you were, graduate level. It's quite a few minutes ago, and here you are talking about that now, right? That's the impact that has on people, and I think that's really important for leaders to understand that. And I get this wrong as much as I get it right, I'm sure, but it's to understand that you're having an impact with each individual, and sometimes we're not aware of the impact that can take place. So it's wonderful,
and I think that's even more important now with particularly for office-based organizations, we're not all together. So you've actually got to make that collaboration happen rather than just naturally expect to bump into people in a corridor or around the office. You've got to actually be quite purposeful in that engagement. And I think that that is, if there is a negative side to agile working, I think that's one of them.
Okay, so while we're on that point, Chris, in terms of how we create a company culture in an increasingly remote workplace, this is something that many of the members in the network are struggling with. It's a topic that comes up a lot. What's your take and what's your approach on it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess we've been quite lucky because as an organization, we've never been just centered around an office. We have our people on construction sites, we have them in clients' offices and also in our own office. So the need to be purposeful around getting people together has always been part of what we do. However, I would say that post-pandemic, we've had to be more purposeful about that. And I think that what we found is that our people preferred direction rather than just being allowed to work completely wherever they want to be. They wanted some idea of what is expected of me and where should I be. And so we found that it's much better to be more directive. When you want to see your people together, you create those sessions where this is an event you will be at and it's going to take place here and this is what's going to happen. And by creating that, you can maintain that engagement. But I think it's not just a challenge for our people, it's also a challenge for our managers. Can they manage at a distance? And we are seeing that there is a necessity for different skills in that space. And so there's definitely a change. We're all going through that change. I guess we had a bit of a head start maybe on other organizations.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never thought of it that way. Some organizations initially always had to have that kind of intention in the first place, which in their DNA probably helped them quite a bit. Let's change back to that lane of leadership. I was just keen around that point, given that we'd gone down that direction there. But let's, as I say, shift back into that other lane around leadership and your journey into these higher leadership positions. You mentioned there, we kind of started at the beginning, almost from kind of graduate level. If you think back to that time frame, what were some of the misconceptions that you would have had about leadership and get into senior positions before you would have kind of entered that journey? What things were you right about, and what things were you surprised about later on in your career as you've kind of made your way up the ladder, so to speak?
I think there's a really important thing here, because I think that as you approach those senior positions, you believe that that person in a senior position, a CEO, an MD, has complete control. And theoretically, they do. But it is very easy to get to a position where the company is managing you rather than you managing the company. And as I have learned, it is of paramount importance to make sure it is the latter. In fact, that is pretty much the job. Otherwise, you can start every day, you can open your laptop and the day will happen to you. The business will happen to you. You have to make sure that it is the other way around. So that level of discipline is so important and vital to delivering the role. There must be plenty of organizations out there, I'm sure, where senior people are finding that they are being managed by their own business, but it is so important to reverse that.
You've mentioned the word discipline there, which comes up quite a bit in these conversations. Again, for a moment of introspection, if you were thinking about your career, what have you learned about yourself as you've progressed through your career and then you've taken on these top leadership positions? Things like discipline or other traits. What's some of the kind of areas that you've thought about and learned about yourself?
I think it's important. I found throughout my career, it's been important to be adventurous. We quite often talk about, many senior leaders talk about being the ones that put their hands up, but honestly, that is an important part of, I believe, in not only making sure that you can further your career, but also be in a position to be adaptable so other career avenues may be open to you. And you've probably heard me say this before, but I always look at it like your passport. So when you graduate, you have a discipline, you have a qualification from university, and that pretty much is where that's your residence. That's where your passport comes from. But it's very important to make sure you visit those other areas, if you like, those other countries. They're going to create that stamp on your passport. So if you're an engineer, if you go into some consulting, that would be a stamp on your passport. Then if you go into program management, that also would be another stamp on your passport. And you've got to make sure that passport is as full as it can be. For the last 5 years, I ran an engineering business, but I'm not actually an engineer. I'm actually a chartered surveyor. So my branches of my passport, if you like, took me to this destination. I'm very pleased to have it as well. But I think this is one of the things that you need to, I always advise our younger people to focus on. It's not just about staying in that one secure lane. Sometimes you've got to challenge yourself and challenge yourself to get out of it as well.
I love that. And in these different positions, because you used to be the MD and head up the region here, and obviously you've taken on a much larger region from on a strategic role as well. In those different steps in your career as you've progressed, have you always felt comfortable going into those positions that you were ready to go, or was it much more of a period of, okay, I need to be comfortable feeling a little bit uncomfortable for a while until I get my feet under the table here?
Definitely. I think it's about getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I think that, again, if we stay in a safe lane, then not only are we probably doing ourselves a disservice, we may well be doing a disservice to the company we're working for, because we're not able to actually create those opportunities for the company, not just for ourselves, for the company as well. So I think it's always important to do that. And I've found every time I've taken that next step, I've had to probably rein in a little bit of my confidence that I'm sure I could do this, to actually think, come on, Chris, have a think about this. What do you expect the challenges to be in this road that is now in front of you? And I think that's also important. So not only have you've got to be willing to do that. I think that some of us at a senior level tend to be quite confident that we can do things, but it's always, if you step into a new role, always pull yourself back and think about actually what are going to be the different challenges of this. And I must admit, it has always surprised me. I remember that the something around isolation. Many leaders talk about the isolation being the top, not just in the context of loneliness. It's not about that, but it's about the isolation of decision making. And I think that's a surprise. So you're always ready for it, but when you get to it, it always surprises you. Far too many people just willing to probably say yes to your suggestions, not necessarily feeling that they've got the permission to discuss critically these things. I always found that sometimes quite difficult to drag out of people. And I suppose also the other thing is the other lesson is that quite often the decisions that make it to your desk are those decisions that have to be made with insufficient information. Because if they'd had sufficient information, that decision would have been made. And so to a certain extent, all the time, you're kind of making judgment calls. And I think that equally comes back to many leaders talk about themselves as actually, if Jack Welch even wrote a book about it, from the gut, because sometimes that's all you got left. You don't have that specific information, and you've got to make that judgment call. And I guess the successful leaders are those who make the right calls.
I love it. One last question, Chris, before we move on to our bit of fun in the quick fire round. And I think I got glimpses of this in our conversation here, but what are the things that, light the fire of Chris in terms of leadership? What's the aspects of it you really enjoy? And what's also the aspects of it that, you don't enjoy as much?
That's a good question. I know in myself that I feel best when I either come out of a meeting with a client and that client has talked about the team, what they've managed to do, that went beyond expectation, and then they may be talking about your next commission. I feel most fulfilled in those moments. And so I think that's something that is the bit that really gets me out of bed. So if I was to, if somebody would say to me, would you want to look at the numbers for the month, or do you want to go and see this client? I would opt to go and see the client. I've got to be honest, and I think that's really from where I've come from as well. And I guess the bit that's the less interesting bit is the detail, the detail around the numbers, the detail around process. It is something that we have to do, and maybe like many leaders, I'm pretty good at it, but it's not a passion. My passion is going out to meet people, is going out to meet clients, hearing about their problems, and also hearing about the successes they've had with my team. But there's always that every job cuts both ways, and that's how it cuts with me.
Well, staying close to the customer, right? They say if you stay close to the customer, you'll never go wrong. Wonderful answer. Chris Seymour, thank you so much for being on Successful Perspectives. Really appreciate you coming on to share your insights.
No problem at all, Trevor. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.